Alrighty, so for our second week Learn Together, I'm going to have you do, again, kind of two parts, not kind of, but two parts to this. But before I go in there and look at this, I just want to give you the, think about where we're at. So you have now, hopefully, by the time you get to this item, done the section 3 code up, right? So the thing I said and there's a video in here that I recorded last semester that is worth watching because it talks about just the process and talks about the importance when you're going through this course to challenge yourself on the challenges, right? Allow yourself to be in that place of figuring things out, trying to apply what you've learned, because that is one of the major goals of this class, is for you to take what you're learning and actually apply it. And so for this section, and I'm scrolling through here looking at the section that you're going to have finished, you're going to be introduced to the beginning of some of the primitives and JavaScript. You're going to do a converter, be introduced to comparison and booleans, the all-important if, the advanced if, the or and scope. So here's what I want you to do. Oh, and before I even say that, I want you to know that if you didn't catch this, and it's really great, up on the second video in section 1, he gives you a PDF. And this PDF, I think, is really helpful. And I would recommend, especially as you're doing the work I'm going to have you do for this item, is to review, right? So you can either look at your code, and some of you may be doing this, which is taking really good notes in your own code, which I would recommend doing. And then he adds some content for concepts to help you also further that knowledge base, okay? So really important to know that that's there and review it. So we've finished now section 3. And so what I want you to do, and I'm going to move over to the section, or the Learn Together, is I want you to take what I had you start thinking about in week 1, which is what are you going to develop, okay? So what I want you to do now is actually take and create something based on what we've learned. And let me just say this for those who know more, only what we've learned, okay? Because one of the things if you're going to be in this industry, the one thing you're going to hear is that each organization probably has a different coding style. And if the larger the shop that you're working in, the more likely that style will be imposed upon you. So what I'm doing in this sense is I'm not necessarily imposing a style, but I'm imposing to you that I want you to only use what you've learned so far. And I want you to write some code that represents basic concept of what you are going to create for our course, right? Now, this doesn't have to be the whole thing. It can just be part of it, right? It can just be, one aspect of it. Because one thing, and I've read this in several of your week 1s, was that, I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. But again, the reason I gave you the overview of what I had created was just to give you some ideas. And what you're doing this week is you're just thinking about those ideas and thinking about what you've learned and come up with code that would represent that. Okay? So that's what you're going to do. Now, I want you to attempt to use most of what you've learned here. Okay? So variables, right? And I think it'd be good to have variables in what we call the global scope, and variables that are in a block scope, right? But, as long as you have some variables in there. I want you to have an if statement, right? I want you to have, numbers and strings in there. And he actually doesn't introduce, I believe, here. I think he does it later. I know we definitely do it in the next code, is using template strings. But that's really just adding eye candy or making it easier for the programmer, the coder, to inject, concatenate strings together to create a little more involved output. But again, I don't require that. But if you know template strings, go ahead and use them if you want to learn about template strings, right? So it's fun to do, right? Because it just is template literals. So, and by the way, if you're not used to MDN, you're going to get used to it. Trust me, not just necessarily in my course, but the idea of learning how to search for things on the web. And this documentation is kind of what I think we would consider kind of the standard for documentation, because not only does it document it, but it gives great examples. So here's an example of adding with a string output and a variable. And it's just a really nice way to do it. But again, you can just use console log the way he's shown, right? So, back to the wrong one. Okay. So I realized as I was reading this, actually, I ended up changing this, but let me say this, you're going to do this on your public repo. And the reason I want you to do this on your public repo is so that we can all look at each other's code. And so I want to show you, I have VS Code open. I'm actually on my Chromebook today, running it in my Linux container. And I have both the public and the private repos. So this work is going to be done out on the public repo. And I want you to create a directory called Playground, and then inside of there, create a file. Now, I haven't dictated the name of the file. I have said create Playground here because I want us all to be having the same folder structure, but the file name will be related to what you're creating. So for me, and I still haven't actually decided for sure, but I just thought I'd create this just to have it for now. I just created a RPS for rock, scissors, paper, because that's what I've been thinking about if I'm going to create. So, and I just put comments in here. And so I recommend highly you put comments as well. So that's what you'll use. You create a new file in that subdirectory. Again, use the code that you have learned, the JavaScript that you have learned so far, to attempt to create some part of your app that you're going to use for this class. And then in your reply, what you can do is once you push your code out to GitHub, right, you can then just give us a link right there. You can just give us a link in your reply to that. But here's the other thing I want you to know is that I've changed this discussion board to where it behaves a little differently than the ones in the past. You will not be able to see other people's posts until you do a reply, okay? So, and I do that really to encourage you to write something and be willing to share it, because, people don't talk about this much, but coding is really an emotional thing. And there's so much that can come up for us around sharing our code, that I want to start this from the beginning so that we help everyone get over that idea, because some people in this class are going to be better coders than you. There's at least one I know that's probably a better coder than I am. I'm actually probably is a better coder than I am. And that's okay. Because the truth is, with coding, with programming, with developing, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So my goal for this course for you is for you to get as much time actually in this process of taking an idea and creating code that is the best representation you can do for implementing that idea. And it does not, again, have to be perfect. Okay? So you'll want to do that. And then, like I said, you won't be able to see other people's responses until you do your own. So in here, right, the first part, and I like that you actually label this, right? And you could give it a different name. I'm fine with that. I've called mine part 1 and part 2, but it's really develop. And I call it develop IT it. And so And it's just my funky little name. You can call these whatever you want. And the other thing is here, it's kind of nice to actually make these headers to where they stand out, because on the second one, and I'll get to that in a second, the second one we're going to do. So here I want a link, right? So if you don't know how to do a link, you do some text, you do this, and then you can, and this is where you could paste, right? I could paste that URL, all right? Now, I do want you to write something on both of these. Each of these is worth 45 points. And then you do have to do 2 replies is worth a total of 10. So each of them is 45, right? So it's 90 and then 10 for the replies. So I want you to write something about the experience of doing this, okay? All right, so I actually haven't done mine to give you the example purposely to get you used to the idea of somebody giving you something to do and you creating some code that is your representation of that idea, okay? Because ultimately that's what the code reviews are going to be. And this is really my way to help you start thinking and working on this code that you'll be coming in to doing reviews with me. Either coming in or virtually doing them, right? Virtually meaning mediated across the web, something like Hangouts, okay? So I'm kind of naturally moving now into the second part here, okay? So on the second part, which is the code reviews, the thing about the code reviews is that you're going to have to, you have to write the code. It needs to work. And then you come in and you first describe the code to me, and then you and I will have a conversation about that code. Okay. So that's the process, right? So if you're trying to think about this, so you're going to take the concept, you're going to create code. It needs to be working code for you to get all the points, right? If you have a few bugs, you and I will talk about and the scoring during it. But the most important part is you be able to talk about and explain your code to me, because this is an important part. And this is a part that this is actually where I think being online becomes a little harder, but not impossible, right? So it's like, how do you get ready to talk about code? Well, you talk about code with somebody. And if you have somebody in your life that you can do that with, I highly recommend, as you're going through this course that we're doing and this work that we're doing, that the more you actually talk to somebody else that may or may not understand code, the more you can articulate it, the better you will be at it, because it will deepen your understanding just by doing that. Okay, so that's the process, right, that you'll go through. Now, the other thing I want to just give you the heads up is I actually today, because I thought it would be important, is I went through and I looked at, because those of you, and there's a couple of you that have taken my 94, will recognize this kind of spreadsheet. And actually it'll be for Dev 1, is that I'm going to set aside, and this will start the week the first Develop at 1 it's going to be due, and it'll run into the week after. And this is where I know students and I get this, I tend to do this as well, but I'm trying to get us to be more proactive, because the reason I'm setting dates the week before it's due is that you may just want to have a conversation with me about the code that you're writing. You may need some help, right? And the sooner you get in and talk to me, the better your Develop at 1 is going to be. Now, some of you may be ready for me to do your code reviews, but notice I have 2 days right now set on Monday before the Develop it's due at midnight on 9/13. So notice I don't have times, right? I don't have actual availability because I'm not up at that time of night. As a matter of fact, we had our first due date. I'm recording this the second day of the first week of the semester, and several of you were working late. Well, that's totally cool with me. Just know it's not my schedule, right? I'm typically early up, relatively early. I knock off typically, don't answer emails after 7, and I'm not up late. So what I'm doing here is I'm scheduling times for you to connect with me, right? So if you're, and by the way, the other thing about coming to see me or connecting with me either the day of or the couple of days before is I can also look at your code and give you suggestions where you might improve to get the most points or just have conversations. But again, each time I meet with students, it's different based on their experience level. So I can't tell you exactly how they're going to go. I can just tell you my goal for this, right, is that you have working code that you can describe and that we can talk about. Okay. And that here is the process. Now, what this also means is that my last time to do code reviews, now you have to submit the code that night. Okay, can't be modified after that night at midnight, even though my last review is at 2:50, right? And then that following week, we'll be looking at code that's already been submitted that can't be changed. So the other benefit is that if you come see me on Wednesday and we say, great job, here's some things you want to do, you have a chance to do that before the submit date. Okay? So I'm just giving you that how this is going to work. Now, what it's going to be is what I'll start working on as we get a little further into this JavaScript course. But we're going to get all the way through arrays, but just through arrays, which means like arrays will have been done Monday night, and our in fact, I was looking at it today just to be clear about this. And I'm going to cancel this because I'm not going to submit it yet. Let me just show you, because I looked at it today to kind of get it in my head as well. Our first development will be due September 13th. And our last section before we do it will be section 6, which will be the 9th, which will mean we'll get all the way through arrays. Okay, so you're going to do functions, objects, and arrays. So what that means is your first project will include all of this JavaScript functionality. Okay. So, and these sections, like I said, the functions are an hour 14, objects, way important part, almost 2 hours. Arrays are over 2 hours, right? So, and then after we do this first development, we actually then move into the browser. And the way he's doing this course, and I know I'm going a little long, so I want to start. It's about as long as I like them to be. But I just want to say that the way we're doing this, which is just to write JavaScript code, running it through the Node command line, I think is a great way to do it. And then introducing the how we integrate it with web pages later, after we've learned some of these core concepts, is one of the reasons I really like this course. Okay, so in your reply, just to go circle around about that, you'll give me a link. I'll change this to where it says playground, right? And then what you will do is talk about, reply about your experience of writing, whatever you end up writing. Know that, again, you can't see anybody's work until you do your reply. And it's really okay to feel nervous about sharing code. That's perfectly normal. So that process is what I'm trying to help you become more comfortable with. And then in part 2, now that I've gone over the code review of what I want and the way it's going to work, right? And talking about, you're going to have to describe your code to me, right? Are there any questions you might have for me? And maybe we have just a conversation here about ways that you can get more comfortable with that code and talking about that code. And one of the things I would say is come see me. My office hour is obviously a time that I am there, and you and I can just start talking about this code if you don't have somebody in your life already to do that with you. Okay? All right. So that's the parts you need to do. I haven't done a word length here, just because, I'm going to leave it up to you to understand what substantive is. so that you have substantive responses and replies. All right, talk to you later. Bye.